Hi, this is Mary with McLion Design, and I'm here for you with a brand new tutorial. This is part one of a two-part tutorial about how to get started with paper crafting. This video is going to focus mostly on what kind of tools to buy, as well as a couple resources for you to learn a little more about different scrapbooking styles and how to do it. So, let's dive right in. So, you probably have heard, if you've thought about scrapbooking before, that scrapbooking is really expensive. And while that's sometimes true if you're buying a lot of tools and things like that, there are definitely ways to make it less expensive and a much more accessible hobby for pretty much everybody. So we're going to talk about first the things that you definitely need to buy to be successful in starting paper crafting. So the first thing, obviously, is paper. So there's tons of different kinds of paper out there, tons of different companies, tons of different styles of paper, weights, thicknesses, all of that stuff. But what I really recommend when you're just getting started is to get something like this. This is pattern paper from Authentique's Winter 3 line. It's pretty thick. It's kind of like cardstock thickness. And the handy thing about that is you're going to be putting photos and more paper and, flowers and stickers and all kinds of stuff on this. And for a thin piece of paper, like you might get for kind of cheap at Joann's or Michael's or whatever, that's going to weigh that paper down. It's going to wrinkle it. It might even tear it if you put too much on. So it's important to buy good quality paper, especially as a background. If you're doing things like cards, it might be okay to get away with some cheaper paper. But if you're doing layouts, this is the kind of thing that you want. I got this paper at my local scrapbook store, which is Lila's Scrapbooking More in Everett, Washington. And I really recommend that you get your paper at a scrapbook store and not just a craft store like Michael's or whatever. And the reason for that is twofold. Number one, you're going to be seeing a lot more designer paper like this, which is better quality, it's nicer, it's prettier most of the time. And number two, you're going to be supporting a local business, which is super important. And you'll see when we talk about resources for learning that your scrapbook store is like your number one resource to learn new tricks and tips and things like that. So after you have your paper, you're going to need something with which to cut it. So there's a couple things that you can use. First thing is you're going to need a paper cutter like this guy. And this is the best tool for a beginning scrapbooker. And the reason for that is it's by Cricut, which is an excellent company. They make the larger die cut machines, kind of. They're electric. They're really awesome. But the cool thing is that this guy is only $10, whereas those giant machines are like $200 and up. So the little pieces of this guy that are important are this bar, which comes down and holds your paper in place, this little guy, which is your razor that cuts your paper, and this part, which is the ruler that folds out. You really want to get a paper cutter that has this, or is really large, because standard scrapbook paper is 12 by 12, and you want to be able to use your whole piece of paper when you're cutting and not just kind of randomly cut it in whatever place you can, just so you can fit it in your slicer. So this is a great tool to start with. Again, $10, you can get it at Michael's, Joann's, wherever, or you can order it from your local scrapbook store. If you are already a little committed to scrapbooking, or you've already done some paper crafting and you know you're going to do more in the future, it might be a good idea to get something more like this. This is a rotary cutter from Fiskars, and it has glue on it. Try to ignore that. And the cool thing about this guy is he's pretty heavy duty. He's a little sturdier. The blade lasts a little bit longer, and it can cut a little bit thinner. So if you're using the other cutter and you're cutting like a thin piece of paper, it might rip or it might wrinkle because it's not quite as good at really thin, accurate cutting. Whereas this guy is going to do a much better job. And he also has the fold-out ruler, which is also helpful. So after you have your paper cutters, you want to get a good pair of scissors. And there's tons of different brands of scissors, kinds of scissors out there. And you can pretty much use whatever you want. But if you're going to be serious about paper crafting at all, it's important to get a good pair of scissors that's going to last and really do a lot of things, be like a utility pair. And for me, that's this pair of Tonic Tim Holtz scissors. And the reason that these are so awesome is that they're crazy sharp. They have a very thin tip, which means you can get in there and do really tiny detailed cutting. And they're non-stick, which for someone who is very messy like me, everything should be non-stick. The whole world should be Teflon. And so if you get glue on it or whatever, you can just wipe it off and it's not there. So you won't ruin your scissors cutting stuff. So the next thing you're going to need is, now that you've cut your paper, you're going to need to be able to stick it together, right? So there's a couple different tools for that, a couple different brands of things. You can start with some basic glue runners that you can get at Michael's. The brand I recommend is Scrapbook Adhesives. They come in these little red things. They're like round on the back and pointy on one end. They're good, but they're limited. And the reason is that they don't last super long. And they're disposable, so you can't refill them, you just have to throw them away, which A, is pretty wasteful, and B, considering they're like $6 each, kind of expensive. So once again, if you think you're definitely going to be doing paper crafting in the future, you might want to invest in something like this big honkin' monster. Now, it looks intimidating, looks scary, looks like you have to be a super serious scrapbooker to like something like this. But actually, it's very easy to use, and even though it's about $40, in comparing that to the glue runner, which is $6 every time, refills for this are anywhere between $2 and $3. And if you use a coupon at a store, you can get this guy for 40% off. Or at my store, you can order it through your local scrapbook store and get a discount. I know at our store, if you order ahead of time, you pay cash or check, you get 35% off. So not too expensive. You're also maybe going to want something like this. This is called Glossy Accents. And Glossy Accents is a dimensional glue that you can use. You can go over a pattern on a paper, and it makes it kind of like those puffy stickers that you had as a kid. But it's also really great utility liquid glue. So if you're trying to stick something heavier onto your paper, like, maybe like this film strip from Tim Holtz, this is a really good glue to do that. After it dries, it's not going anywhere. It's going to dry clear. It's, archival. It's not going to mess anything up. Speaking of archival, do not use glue sticks. Please, don't use glue sticks. I know they're cheap. I know it's tempting, but they're not archival, which means that they will yellow after a while. They may ruin your paper. They may ruin your pictures. And since the idea of scrapbooking and paper crafting is often to capture and preserve memories, you don't want to ruin those memories by trying to preserve them with the wrong thing. So don't use glue sticks, don't use Elmer's glue. Stick with stuff that's made for paper crafting because it's going to be better for you. All right. So we've talked about paper cutter, scissors, glues, and paper. The other thing that I really recommend that you get is ink. I use ink for everything. I'm a big stamper, and I use it a lot for edging things and watercoloring. I use it for everything. If you're just starting out, it's okay not to have 50 different colors of ink. But if you are going to start using ink, a good idea is to start with these two. This is Ranger Distress Ink from Tim Holtz, and this one is black soot, so it's just plain black. It's totally utility. You can use it for everything. Sentiments, if you're stamping thank you or whatever on a card, it's handy. And as they say in fashion, black goes with everything. The other thing that I suggest that you get, and this is kind of an unusual thing, I guess, for basics, but it's called Perfect Medium, and it's an embossing liquid. And it's just a ink pad, just like a regular ink pad. And the reason that this guy is really cool is because you can use it for a lot of different things. If you want to stamp something and then cover that stamp with, some embossing powder, you can do a resist pattern. It's really handy. And we'll talk about resist in another video, but this is a really good thing to have, and I use it all the time. So those are the very basics. So you want to get a good quality paper. And again, buy your paper as you need it. You don't have to go out and buy 5 sheets of every color and, one of every occasion. Buy it as you need it, and very quickly you will build up a huge collection of paper. I think I gave away about 250 pieces of paper over the summer. Just gave them away because I had so much. So it's very easy to kind of amass lots of paper. You always buy more than you think more than you'll actually need. So you want good quality paper. You want a good paper cutter. That Cricut one is great, or the Fiskars one. You want good quality scissors, like the ones from Tim Holtz and Tonic. You want good ink and good glues, and those are your basics. If you have all of that, then you're ready to scrapbook. You can start rocking and rolling. There are a couple things that I do use that go a little above and beyond that stuff. So let's talk about that real fast. One thing is ribbon or lace or twine. And that's a really super simple way to give your project a little bit of a pop and also to give it a little bit of dimension without having to do a huge amount of work. So one of the things that I use is lace. This is lace that I got at Joann's. It was on crazy clearance, and it's gorgeous. And I've used it on cards, I've used it on layouts. You can use it for anything. Here's another kind of lace that you can use. I use yarn, especially on cards. Yarn makes your card, because it's so soft, it makes your card look a little soft. It makes it really nice and warm. It's great for winter cards. You can just use regular ribbon, like this little guy, or you can use twine, like this guy, which is from Hemtique. So, if you are also thinking about doing a little bit of a fancier card or whatever, you might want to think about embossing. And there's a couple different ways to emboss. You can use an embossing folder, like this guy from Tim Holtz, which will push the pattern into your paper when you run it through a machine like a Sizzix or a Vagabond. Or, and this is what I use a little more frequently, you can use embossing powder. So this is just plain clear embossing powder from Hampton Arts. Cool thing about this is whatever color you stamp in, that's the color it'll be when it's embossed. So get clear embossing powder. Don't buy a billion different colors. And then you need a heat tool to heat it up and melt it. So the powder sticks to the wet ink. Turn on the heat tool melts it, makes it shiny, makes it dimensional, makes it look really nice and professional. So the heat tool that I use is this one from Ranger. It's called the Heat It Craft tool. It's awesome. It's quiet. It blows really hot air, but it doesn't blow a lot of air, so it's not blowing your stuff around and blowing the powder off the ink. It's a really excellent tool. The last thing we're going to talk about is stamps, and there's a couple different kinds of stamps. You could get clear stamps like these. These are from Bo Bunny, and these are cool, but they have kind of limits because A, they are kind of wobbly, so you have to stick them onto these blocks so that you can stamp with them. And B, because they're so wobbly, they're also kind of squishy, and that means that if you push down really hard when you're stamping, you could get some of this negative space pushed down onto your paper and get ink in place that ink shouldn't be, or you could mess up the pattern and some of the finer details could get kind of blurry. So although these are good and they're handy, you have to be very careful with them. The real bread and butter of stamping are the mounted stamps. This one is from Inkadinkadoo, and this is one of the ones I'm using for one of my birthday cards. And these guys are cool. They have a little rubber mounted on wood. The drawback of these is that you can't exactly see where you're placing them, unlike the clear ones, which you can use the block that has the lines to help you kind of really put them where they need to go. But these are not going to smush quite as easily, so you're not going to mess up fine lines quite as easily if you push really hard like I do. So yeah, so start looking at stamps. Look in the Michaels $1, $1.50 bin. That is where this guy came from, and I use it all the time. So yeah, so keep an eye out for stamps. They go on sale a lot. Keep an eye out for them. Those are the basics. There's some other things that you could think about getting, like punches or the film strip that I showed you from Tim Holtz, but that stuff is a little more advanced. It's not a big deal if you're starting out, just to kind of be basic. So last thing we're going to talk about is resources for learning. Now, there's tons of videos on YouTube like this one, but there are also really great opportunities to learn at your local scrapbook store. They often have classes, and the best way to go is to go to a crop, which is a group of ladies and gentlemen who get together and just scrapbook together. And the reason that that is handy is because when you're learning from a teacher, you're really only learning their style and their perspective, but when you go to a crop, you can walk around and see 15 different styles in one room. So it's a really great place to go and learn and, kind of be buds with other people who have, paper crafting in common with you. So it's a good thing to do. So look online, find your local scrapbook store. They're your best resource for learning. And look up videos, look at, paper craft magazines, things like that. And all of those will help you improve as you go. So look for our second McLion Design Intro to Paper Crafting video, which will be about basics of layout, how to put together a layout, how to, kind of do some basic design. And I'll do that for both a scrapbook layout and also a card layout, so you kind of have an idea of both. Okay? Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again soon.